Beyond the Wrench with Jay Goninen from Find a Wrench.
Welcome to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and today we welcome Damon Agostino from Sixth Street Automotive in Macclenny, Florida. Damon is a technician at Sixth Street Automotive, and I was able to have a really good conversation with Damon prior to our podcast here, in which he had some honestly really great insights through the eyes of a technician, which I think as we talk more and more, that's what we want more of, right? We want more voice of technician. We want these guys to have their voice heard and really talk about things that we can get them in the room and really understand and maybe break down some communication barriers between employers and technicians. So Damon, how are you today?
Doing great. Thank you, Jay, for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Now, Macclenny is just outside of Jacksonville, right?
Yes, it is. It's in Northeast Florida.
And
It's a county is called Baker.
Okay.
It's a county seat of Baker County. So, and actually it's quite busy for a small town.
Yeah. Oh, I love that area. Although I do have to say it was a little bit of taunting when we first got on the call today because you said that it had gotten down to 30. And now us up in Wisconsin, we're starting to just the 30s are going to be a distant memory here pretty quick as we head towards Christmas. So
yeah, we sort of didn't know what to do. We had to run our water and bring all the plants and pipes, pets in. So yeah, we really suffered hard for a couple of days.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Damon, and how, I guess, how you got to where you're at today and maybe explain a little bit of what you do as a technician.
Well, actually, I got into the automotive trade sort of late in life. I've only been a technician now for 8 years. I've actually been at Sixth Street Automotive for 7 years. And really, growing up, as a child, my grandfather was an old Army mechanic, and so he taught me how to work on vehicles, the shade tree sort of way, on the farm where we grew up in Northeast Florida. And so I had a good background about basically how things operate. I could change brakes and, do small things on automobiles pretty much my whole life. And I decided, well, I really love this industry. And I left the other industry which I was in, which was in the healthcare field.
Wow.
And I was just bored, sitting behind a desk all day. I didn't enjoy it at all. So I just started out changing oil at a local shop and oil and tires, and they slowly let me start doing some mechanics. And 8 years later, I have 7 ASC certifications, including L1, and I really, really love it. And today at my shop, I'm pretty much the only diagnostic guy. I do all the programming, do all the, the computer diagnostics, and we specialize in General Motors. We're an AC Delco shop, so that's my strong suit there.
That's crazy. So it's maybe a little bit of a different entry, although you did have exposure to it from your grandfather, it sounds like. Was it on your radar when you were on the healthcare side? Like, was it something where you're just like, hey, that actually looks kind of cool, or I've got some experience with it?
Well, it kind of was. And actually, I was interested in, we had a mechanic shop in high school, and I didn't enter the program, but I thought about it, and it was always in the back of my mind. And since I did not have a 4-year degree, I wasn't, a doctor or pharmacist or anything like that. I have a 2-year degree from a local college, and I was also in the military for 6.5 years in the reserves. And that got me into the healthcare because I had a scholarship for it. So, but it ended up, I was unhappy, being inside and being in a sterile environment, so to speak. And I just wanted to get more into mechanics. And when I really found out that, and I really love computers and working with, electrical things and stuff like that. And when I found out that I could do this in the automotive world, it wasn't just a typical grease monkey job anymore. That really caught my interest, and I just dove right into it.
Wow. And has that been accurate? Like that portrayal of not being a grease monkey as, like a traditional maybe mechanic was viewed as to now, Are you seeing like was it the same thing as what you thought it was going to be?
It actually is, and now I have a better understanding of why we are called technicians today. We're not called mechanics anymore.
Yep.
Because the role on the vehicle is not just mechanical, and actually most of my days deal with diagnosing electrical circuits and systems and computer networks. There's certainly exceptions to the rule where some days it's purely mechanical, but as the industry goes more and more green, so to speak, and all the automotive manufacturers are shifting towards all electrical cars, unless you get into it and electrical systems and the laws of it, Ohm's law and everything, you're going to get lost and fall behind. But yes, it's actually better than I thought it was going to be, so I really enjoy it.
That's awesome. So how does somebody go from changing oil in the first year to understanding diagnostics, just a short time later? And granted, 7 years is still nothing did you say 7 or 8 years?
Well, 8 total.
8 total.
But yeah, actually only about 6.5 of that has been as a technician. About
Really?
a year and a half, I was strictly an oil changer, tire changer, and just replacing small parts, no diagnostics. But I can remember I've always had an aptitude in high school and in college for math and science. Those were my strong suits. And, and it turns out that those are the things I'm using right now in the automotive field. I did poorly in history, did poorly in, geography and stuff like that. But I love science and I love math. And, and really, I guess I can remember the first day that I asked my boss, I was working for at the time, what is this thing called an oscilloscope? And he had an older one built into the Snap-on Vera scan tool. And he said, well, that graphs out, and to me, it looked like an electrocardiogram like I saw in the hospitals,
Oh,
when I was in that field. And I'm like, wow, it does. It measures, electricity over time. So basically the same thing. So I just, played with it and just kept playing with it and learned. And then later on, I found a company, a group called Auto Nerds. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
But I've been a member of Auto Nerds now for about 4 or 5 years and learned a tremendous amount about diagnostics and using the scope through them.
Oh man, this is what I love about you, Damon, is that piece right there is something that I don't think enough young techs understand. Is first and foremost, when I was a young tech, and again, I refer to this all the time, I was a terrible tech. So this is from a terrible technician that's saying this, is I didn't take math or science seriously in high school. And I always thought, oh, I'm going to be working on cars. Like, what do I need all that for? And then looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, that was the exact opposite approach of what I should have taken.
Yeah. So no, I would have never known years ago that, cars would be like they are today. And, and it's funny sometimes how we can get customers that'll come in and they're having one issue and they think it's, they're pretty sure it's this area of the car or this, system on the car, and it's something totally different causing the problem. For example, like a defective brake switch we had about a year ago on a GMC Traverse was causing all kinds of drivability issues, bucking and surging. And and you would never put the two together. It didn't make sense even to me as I was caught it on a diagnosis, but it all works together.
So what was it that made it click? Because I think so many people from a technician's standpoint, and we talk to shops all day, every day, and they talk about needing more diagnostic people, right? And where I think we lack, or maybe sometimes we overcomplicate diagnostics and try to, I was lucky enough to have an instructor at one point that just said, hey, listen, you've got this that sends an output signal to here, and you're telling it what to do, and then you're getting a sensor that tells it what it's done, and it's just a communication loop, and you try to figure that out. That wasn't until after I was out of the shop, so that would have helped me a lot if I was asked that. But is that what I mean? Do you find that if you simplify things, it makes it easier, or is it just because of your background and everything that you had that was like why it clicked?
Well, for me, I think it came about when I was starting to earn my ASE certifications, because I was always, in my mind, viewed them as very important, and that's a whole nother podcast, for a different subject
Yeah.
about ASE certifications. But I'm very, I guess, I love to take tests. I'm a good test taker, and once I was reading and studying the ASE manuals, that's really when it clicked to me how all these systems work. And the key to diagnosing that I found out, much like other things, that I've dealt with in the past, is that if you understand the system, then and how it works, if you read the description and operation, you get that good understanding, you can diagnose anything on that system. And so that's really, what did it for me. I had a couple instructors of courses that I was taking, and they said, look, you need to, if you get a different vehicle, because working at an independent shop, we get all makes, all models. It's not like being in a dealership and you see the same thing over and over and over. So I might get a BMW that I've never even lifted the hood under before with a problem, and I have to spend time, and that's the key, is being willing to spend time researching and understanding the system itself.
So, and this kind of, I think it works its way into what we wanted to talk about today, which is how a tech might evaluate employers, or really even look at, what is the expectation of an employer through the eyes of a tech. I think this kind of strikes me as a really, really good segue to that, because I think what happens a lot of times, and especially when you get into a flat rate shop, is that you get rushed right off the bat, right? And you're not doing it to learn, you're doing it to get it out of the shop as fast as you possibly can, because
Right.
That's how you're getting paid, right?
Right.
Is that, give me your perspective on that side of it.
Well, initially it kind of was looked at it as a setback to me when I went to flat rate a while back, because I started out learning all this when I was hourly, when I was still changing oil. And then I went to my employer, when I wanted to become a technician, and said, look, I don't know that I could make it on flat rate. I'm not fast at what I do, but I do a good job at what I do. And way back, I was able to stay an oil changer and do some mechanical work, and he paid me like a flat rate differential on top of my hourly, oil changer rate. So it actually worked out, and I did a lot of learning during that time. So it really didn't cost me a whole lot. And then finally, when I went to flat rate, I was a lot more proficient, than I was. But when I talk to other technicians, especially in my shop and other shops, that I run into, and they don't use a scope, they don't know anything about it. They don't, if it's a hard electrical problem, they send it somewhere else or send it to the dealer. And I'm like, look, this is, pretty simple to learn. I know a lot of like smart people, they're very smart. It's not a question of can they learn it, but you hit the key. It's learning it on the flat rate dollar.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of time. And I guess where I differ from others is a lot of the technicians that I know, once they leave the shop, they forget about the automotive world, where, in my living room, and my wife sometimes complains, it's like, you have so many automotive magazines. What is there to read? What is there to learn? But that's what I do in a lot of my free time is study, the trade magazines, get online in the forums like IATN, Auto Nerds, Diagnostic Network, and just learn from other people's case studies.
Man, that is awesome. And that's truly, you're viewing this as like a craft. It's not,
Yes.
It's not just a job, or,
Yes.
like this is something you're passionate about. And I'm sure, maybe you're reading something on some issue on Diagnostic Network or whatever you're on, and it doesn't happen right away, but there's a time in the shop, probably a month down the road, where, oh my goodness, I read that. And
Yes. Yes.
do you run across that?
Absolutely. And there will be something that I've read, and especially on the, the training courses I've taken a a lot of AC Delco courses, and they'll just say like one little thing that was not even the focus of the course. And I'll pick it up, later I'll run into that same problem, and I'll say, you know what, I know exactly what this is because I learned about it. That happens a lot of the time, more so than often. And especially how, I guess that, another part of the industry that a lot of shops, a lot of technicians don't realize is how specific the cars are for especially like the oil you put in them to the parts you put on them. Whereas years ago, you can run down to your local auto parts store and slap that on there and it'll work. We're finding out today with a lot of these electronic parts, even down to like a wheel speed sensor, if it's not OEM, a lot of times it's not going to work. And, just understanding little details like that. But my employer that I work for, and I've been at Sixth Street Automotive now for 7 years, my employer understands that, and I get all the hard diagnostic stuff, and it's not, I don't lose anymore, basically. And a lot of it was educating the service manager to, hey, we need to call this customer. They have a complex network problem. Let's get another hour of diagnostic. So the shop doesn't lose and I don't lose. But it was a long education process that went on there. And especially, telling some customers, hey, it's going to cost you $160 to diagnose your problem. And it may be just a rubbed wire somewhere, A lot of customers, just step back from that. Some decline it. They're like, no, I'm not paying that, but I mean, slowly, it's going that way. But that's what technicians want. A lot of technicians I talk to, they get frustrated with, the hours, the shop hours, the labor hours that they get paid, on a job. I mean, if you're doing strictly mechanical stuff, parts changing, then you can make a fortune in flat rate. If you do engines, transmissions, and stuff like that all day, and we have some techs that do that, and that's all they do, and they do well. But then if you're a technician that gets a lot of the diagnostic problems, if you're not efficient at it, and if you don't have a clear path on how to diagnose and communicate really with the customer and the service manager, you can lose your shirt doing it.
Yeah. I think that's where, in my experience anyways, where the level of disconnect comes. And I think I hear it more on the dealership side than I do the independent side,
Yes.
right? Where
Yes.
it is more of, if you are maybe the perception, right? And some manufacturers are different than others, but the perception is that if you're a good diagnostic tech, you're not going to get treated fairly by that flat rate system.
Yes,
I mean,
I've
do
heard
you
that
hear
a
something
lot.
similar? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Especially on the forums where they'll vent sometimes. For example, like General Motors, I interact with a lot of General Motors technicians, and they say that all they get paid for a diagnostic is 0.3.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. It's like, no matter what it is, it's, that's all General Motors pays. And I don't know, eventually I think something is going to happen. They're going to lose a lot of technicians. They're going to have to, make like some of them hourly or salary, or make something's going to have to change in this industry.
I'm a huge advocate for having hybrid systems, or and not even hybrid systems as much as, like, I'm not talking just an hourly plus an incentive, but more
Right.
so giving a technician the option of
Right.
which system they want to be in. Right. And,
Right.
and I think that the general perception from a management standpoint is that, oh, if I put them on hourly, they're just going to be lazy. They're not going to do anything, right? Like, I mean,
Exactly.
I kind of get that feeling from managers, but
Yes.
on the other, and granted, I have seen technicians abuse that too.
Yes.
But for the most part, my opinion is they're not trying to game the system. They just want to make sure that they're being treated fairly.
Right. Right. And the first shop, ironically, that I started at, the owner had all salaried employees. All the technicians, were paid a salary, but contrary to that, he micromanaged, and you don't sit down for 5 minutes. You don't, if he sees you going slow on a job, he was like a hawk circling over you. And so it was like one extreme, because he didn't want a lazy technician. He didn't want to waste his money, but in the long run, it works out for his shop, and he's been doing it that way for years. But a lot of owners you talk to, they say that, well, if I put them on an hourly wage, then they're going to slack off, and I've seen that happen because it's been tried, actually at the current shop I'm at. And for some people it works and some it doesn't, but I believe it's like any other industry, like when I was in the medical field, well, you're hourly there. If you're not performing, what do? They fire you,
Yeah.
or they write you up or whatever. And I think that's just going to have to start happening in this industry, because I mean, the more complex these vehicles get and the more they go to electrification, you know, to get specialized technicians that know what they're doing, you know, is going to be difficult unless they offer them something, you know, other than flat rate.
Yeah, I agree. And I also agree with a point that you brought up with it's not that much different than any other industry, right? And
Right.
it comes down to hiring the right people and not hanging on to the wrong people.
Yes.
And you know, from the standpoint of sometimes it sounds crude from I'm guessing from a technician standpoint when I say that, but I've worked with techs that are just miserable in their job, and then they go somewhere else and they're happy, and it's just because it's a better fit for them. There's more like the personalities match up,
Yes.
you know, whatever, and that's okay. Like that's not from a technician standpoint, you should want to get to that point to where you're at a place that fits your style, where you're happy, because
Yes.
otherwise every day is going to be miserable and you're going to hate being a tech. And if you're a guy that likes independence and you've got that manager that's a hawk all over you all the time, then that's not going to be fun. But if you're a person that you know you need to be driven a little bit, but then that you got a lazy manager or something, that's probably not a good fit, right? Like I don't. Do you see when you're in your experience with techs? I mean, how do they handle management, and how much does it vary by tech?
Quite a bit. It's like there's a couple. The management I have in my shop now is very laid back. They do not micromanage. They don't, you know, hover over you or anything like that. And, you know, we have a couple people, you know, in the shop now that if they worked where I worked in the past where they do micromanage, they would last about a week.
Yeah.
Just like you said, it's not their fit. It's not their style. You know, but it's like almost there's a fine line to walk there, because you don't want to be too laid back and then the shop loses its efficiency, and it's, you know, you're losing money, just money going out the front door if you're not an efficient shop and you're not watching your techs, you know, pretty close. But I found that almost like sometimes there's a little competition there with us technicians, because I could be turning out, you know, some complex vehicles, a couple of them, and the other next technician, the next bay, you know, gets a little more motivated. You know, like one example is at my shop, we get our lunch breaks, you know, up to, you know, you can take up to an hour if you want to, or you don't have to take one or whatever. And a lot of times I'll take less than an hour. And that was like a new thing for the shop. I'd get up from the table in 20 minutes and I'd go eat. I mean, go back to work. And the other guy's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm going to go turn some more hours, you know? And so actually I found that it motivated a couple of the others to get up from the table, you know, get off of your phone, and get back to work, you know? And it's just things like that, and different things motivate different technicians, you know? And I've been told also by some of my bosses that I was told one time before I came to the particular shop I'm at, one of the owners told me, he said, I can wave $100 bill in front of such and such an employee, you know, who's no longer there, and it wouldn't matter. I said, try waving it in front of me. You know, it does matter to me. So some of them, you know, some are hungry, you know, for it, and not just the money, but just, you know, to better themselves and you know, and do better for the shop. Some just don't care. They just want their whatever hours they can turn that week, and that's it, you know. But
that's the fit thing, right? And it's I don't think enough shop management people get that part of the dynamics that go into a shop and the different personalities. And one of the things, you know, and I think it ties right in with what we're talking about of you know, really what a technician expects of an employer. One of the first things that I see a lot of employers screw up is that they put all technicians into one big bag. Like it's like all technicians are exactly the same.
Right.
Do you am I off base there, or is that, I mean, is that more common than I think people?
No, you're pretty much on, you know, you're pretty much right on it, because employers do look at it that way. And it depends on where you are too. It depends on, like, for example, there's a huge difference in the technicians, say in the heart of Jacksonville where I live, and, you know, versus the little town that I'm in. Like in the little town, there's probably 12 or 13 automotive shops, most of them smaller. And I've seen over the years, it's the same technicians, and they like go in a circle between all the shops, because they're not happy, or because they don't perform and they get laid off or fired or whatever, and then hired back, 2 years later. But yes, for a large part, a lot of shop owners do think that all technicians are the same. And I think probably 10 or 15 years ago, you could say that about most of the technicians. And then we go back to the grease monkey image, whereas anymore, that's not becoming true. And shop owners are seeing that. And there's some out there that, refuse to change, and then their bays are empty. There's no one to work for them. So,
and they're wondering why, right? And that's,
yes,
to me, that is such an elementary thing that we need shops to understand, is that right there. Like,
yes.
And so let me ask you this: when there's still a little bit, I get the feeling that there's still a little bit of old school. There's still a lot of old school in our business, but one of the things that a lot of managers will talk about, and I see it through whether it's other people's podcasts or through chat boards or whatever it is, where they almost talk about like, well, I'm not going to treat them like a princess. I'm not going to, how do you want a shop to treat you? Like, how do you want somebody to manage you?
Well, I believe it depends on the individual. And myself, I like to be just, hey, here's what you need to do, get it done. I don't like the close oversight. And I understand that once you're at a new employer, you're going to have that oversight, because they want to see. I can't tell you how many technicians, the owners hired in my shop, and they've come in, oh, I can do this, I can do that. And they unload 5 toolboxes out of a U-Haul and put them in, and they can't perform, Yeah. And, and the first thing I tell the shop owner, I said, they're looking for a job for a reason. It's like the old saying, my family, especially my father's side, has always had restaurants, Italian restaurants. And he told me one time when I was working for him in that industry, when I was very young, he said, we were looking for servers or waiters. And he said, all the good ones are already taken.
Yes.
He said, if you have ones that come to your door, he said, most of the time you don't want them. And I found that true, especially for this business. If you have a technician that, just shows up, and it's not always, there's every exception to every rule, but if you have a technician that's always, going here and there looking for work, well, something must be wrong. Or if he's had 3 shops in the past 2 years, there might be a problem.
Yeah, and a chance that person just might never be happy, or
right.
unless something drastic changes.
Right.
What do you see out of techs when they come in? So it's interesting to me, because you have and especially now that you've been there for a while, you've got the unique opportunity to see maybe and view from a distance when a new tech comes in and how management handles that person. And whether that's a new person to the industry or just new to the shop, how is that dynamic? I mean, and one, it sounds like you have a great place to work at. It sounds like these people are just phenomenal. We could use more like them. But how do you see, I guess one of my concerns, and maybe let me rephrase this. One of my concerns is when we bring in a young tech, we almost like eat our own, right? Like, because we're they don't perform right away, and they've asked for a certain amount of money, which they
Yes.
can't live up to that expectation. So then it's such a weird cycle that we see continuously. Do you see it in your shop?
Well, what I've seen quite a bit is they'll hire a new technician, and they'll have this dynamic resume, or they'll tell the story of what they can do, or I owned my own shop for 20 years, and so they'll give them a chance, and they'll start them, and what you'll find out is, like, the first month they're fantastic, they're turning out good work, they're taking their time, they're diagnosing correctly, and then it's like something happens, and then now that they have 50% comebacks, and they're falling off, and it's like, okay, now I know why you were job hunting in the first place. And to me, if I see a technician that comes in and says, well, yeah, I used to own my own shop. Well, my first thought is, well, what happened?
Right.
If you owned your own shop, it must not have been successful, or you wouldn't be here today, because the ideal thing to do as a shop owner is once you reach the age of retirement, hopefully you have good management and good technicians that can run your shop for you, and you don't have to be there, doing it. But where I work, they give everybody a fair shake, and they bring them in when they're looking for a technician, and take them at their word. And then they'll wait. They'll like pay, let's say I'll pay you, X number of dollars now. And if you, do well and do everything you say you can do, I'll give you a couple more dollars an hour, in a month or whatever. But they give everybody a fair shake. But I tell you, about 70% of the technicians that I've seen come through just aren't who they say they are, or they can't do what they say they can do, and that's a shame. And I think, a lot of times, even when I came to this particular job, I didn't want to oversell myself like that. I undersold. I said, look, I can't do this. I can't do that. And they're like, well, we still want you, you can learn. But, like, for example, today, I have never replaced an engine, never done an engine in 8 years. I can do them, but it's like, I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy long mechanical jobs. It's not my forte. But I, like, for example, I do all the interior dash work, the evaporators, the heater cores. I love it. I love trim work, and, and I can knock that out. And I think the key, especially, is a lot of shop owners have to find out, where is this technician's strong suit? And, because I've been to one place, and worked only for actually 3 months, because their idea was, well, I'm going to cross train you in every part of the automotive thing, and it didn't work for me.
Huge mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I was ending up only flagging literally about 20 some hours every week. And I said, look, this isn't going to work. I don't want to do that, but to a certain degree, it's good to have technicians cross-trained in some areas. But, like, there's some that, they're never going to pick up a scope. They're never going to know how to diagnose an electrical problem. They don't know what a load test is, and they have no care to, but they can change an engine, in half the time the book pays. So
and this is fascinating to me, Damon, this part where when you first started out and you grabbed a scope, one, I don't see anybody do that. I mean, that's a pretty fascinating thing. But two, there's a lot of times where a new tech doesn't even know that those tools exist. Like, they don't know it's back in a corner with dust on it. I remember when I worked for my dad growing up, we had this guy that was brilliant with the scope and brilliant with everything, but he was literally the only one that ever used it. And it was kind of like, if I touch this thing, am I going to get in trouble? Because he's the guy that's his baby,
Yeah.
And it was the shop's tool, but he just was like brilliant with it, and you didn't want to screw with it. Do you ever see that where somebody's maybe a little gun shy to even go use one of these tools in a shop?
Kind of. I mean, especially when, I've had techs come in and I'll break out my picoscope and I'll be diagnosing a vehicle, and they're like, hey, I think I'm going to, like, this one technician that worked for us for about a year. He was interested in it and want to learn it. And he's like, well, how much does that cost? Can I get one? And when I told him, it's, nearly a $3,000 tool with the whole kit and everything, he's like, whoa.
Yeah.
I said, but you can buy a cheap one for a couple $100 and learn, this way. So sometimes you get that, but more often than not, there's just no interest. There's just no interest there. Whereas me, I've always had a aptitude and an interest in electrical things, and just taking things. When I was a child, my mother reminds me, I would just take apart a radio to see how it worked, and of course it wouldn't work again because I was 5 years old, but I had my tools and I was going to take it apart and see how it worked. And that's just where my interest lied. And I have a big, interest in computers and software and stuff like that. So really it came natural. And thankfully at the time when I looked at the snap-on scope that we had in the shop years ago, the owner said, just take it and play with it. He said, wow. You can't break it, just go play with it. So that's what I did.
You know what I was always more concerned about when I was doing that was how many times I got told, like, if you fry that ECU, you're in trouble. Like,
oh yeah.
That I think is again a lot of young techs when they want to go dive into electrical stuff. and they hear that, hey, that ECU, and I don't know what an ECU runs now, but if it was $1,000 or whatever it was, you were terrible. And at the time you have no money. So you're like, okay, if I do this and they take it out of my check, oh my goodness, it's going to be terrible. So then I think it almost paralyzes you from actually trying stuff because you're so deathly afraid of screwing something up.
I was actually never told that and never knew I could fry an ECU. So I didn't know. But
it's the best thing that could happen to you.
Yeah, but actually with the scope, you're not putting power to anything. So there's no way really. Well, I'm not going to say there's no way. There are ways, but it's very hard to fry an ECU with it versus when I was learning to play with a power probe, putting power to things. I had to learn the hard way a couple times, but yeah, I don't think it's a matter of, just being put in fear or, shunned away from it. It's just, I've seen it's a matter of wanting to learn it, and I could probably say that in my county where I work, of the 12, 13 different shops, I believe to my knowledge, I'm the only one who has a picoscope or any type of oscilloscope.
Wow.
Other than maybe an old snap-on built into the scan tool, and it's sad, it's like, because there's plenty of work out there for everybody. It's like, my owner does not worry about competing shops. We don't worry about competing technicians because there's plenty for everybody.
Yes.
And, and thankfully a lot of the other shops, they'll have a car for 3 or 4 days, not be able to figure it out. And where does it go? It goes to me, and so I'm like kind of proud of that, and I can't figure them all out, but a lot of them I can. And really the biggest help to me, because I am quote unquote isolated, I don't have anybody, in the shop to bounce the technical stuff off of. I go to my forums. I go to, to the Auto Nerds or IHN or Diagnostic Network, or just email people I know at a dealership, and that has really, really taught me a lot. And being alone, so to speak, in the diagnostic world where I'm at, it's forced me to learn. It's forced me to be better.
Man, what a good point. I mean,
yeah.
And you talk about, there's some of these forums, and I know Scott Brown at Diagnostic Network and a couple other people that I really applaud what they're doing, because they do a great job at creating a network.
Yes.
It goes far beyond just, read the schematic and tell me what's wrong. It's truly building relationships and having people be able to work together. And I mean, let's face it, those are typically some of the brighter techs that are out there, and some of the, the more apt to be able to diagnose something. And that's, to me, that's what almost every shop owner in the nation craves right now, is that person.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And I tell you, I have probably 90% of my vehicle network diagnostics, especially with General Motors, I've learned off of one technician in Central Florida who's part of the forums. And I've read his case studies after study after study. And that's how I learn, just to make it very simple. He simplifies it because he has a mind for that, whereas I would have never thought of how to diagnose it on my own that way. But just being able to network, that's the key. Because I've even seen and talked to some technicians where if you go into a shop and you ask for some help with something from a senior tech or more experienced, well, they're not going to tell you, they're not going to share their knowledge with you, unfortunately, because I guess they know that, hey, I'm making money with this up here, and if I show this technician, it's going to be less money for me. Whereas that's not reality, but that's their perception of it.
Yeah, and that part drives me nuts too. Again, kind of going back to eating our own, it really, that I think it's shifting a little bit where it's not such an old school approach in a shop.
Right.
Like, when I was growing up, it was kind of just mind your own business, do your thing, and don't ask me for anything, right? Like,
yeah.
It was. I hope it's changing. Unfortunately, I don't get to be in a shop every day anymore, but from the shops that I am in, it does feel like that's shifting or that's changing. Like there is more, and again, this could go back to the pay plan piece too, right? Because if it's all everybody for themselves, straight up flat rate, you're not getting paid, there's no guarantee, they still got to put food on the table, right? And so like
Exactly.
that's where you start to get that
Right.
infighting. In my opinion, that's at least what I've seen, anyways.
Right. And you know, and even at my shop, I don't mind showing somebody else and another technician if they want to learn something. I'm happy to show them, you know, or a new, especially for a long time we went through a lot of lube techs,
Yep.
you know, just changing oil. They've never changed oil in a vehicle. They got hired for one reason or another, and just spending time to teach them. You know, the first thing, you know, I like to tell them is you have the most important job. If you leave that oil plug loose, you know, the shop's buying an engine. So it's like no position in the automotive industry is not important. And that's what a lot of people, you know, need to realize as well. And I think it's important that business owners get involved with local high schools who have mechanic programs or local technical schools, you know, and foster them. But the only drawback I've seen to that is the time and the money you have to invest in it. And is that employee going to stay with me where I can get the investment back out of them?
Yeah. And this is one of the things you said that I really am appreciative of your employer is that they're not concerned with the other people. Right. And that's one of the things that I see so often with these shops is that there's a lot of them that are very insecure in that, like, hey, if I put this tech's name out on our Facebook page, or if I put it on our website, people are going to come try to steal them. And I'm like, you guys are you're going at it the wrong way. Like you should be trying to make them happy, treat them right. Like don't be so concerned over what everybody else is trying to like poach your people or whatever it is.
Yes.
Like come up with a good retention strategy so that the people actually like working there, and that takes care of a lot of stuff.
Exactly. And to me, being in like a family owned and operated shop and just having that feeling of family and community all sitting down at the same lunch table and having lunch together, you know, that's a big bonus. And you know, and you develop relationships that way. And it is important to, like, just like you said, learn how to keep your technicians. You know, don't worry about always losing them to the next shop, because not every technician is going to jump at $1 or $2 more an hour down the road. Because what I learned a long time ago, I say a long time ago, a few years ago, just in this industry is, you know, number one, the grass is not always greener on the other side. And it's not, you know, some places aren't worth just a few more dollars an hour to put up what you might have to put up with at some shops. Yeah. But, that's basically it.
Do you have any concern, and when I talk to techs that are independent shop, like they've been at both, you know, if they've been at both dealership and independent, or have been primarily independent, one of the bigger complaints I see out of an independent shop is when a tech doesn't think there's anywhere else to go, right? Like when they've plateaued and you've got to the top and you've got another 30 years to work.
Right.
What does that what do you do there if you're a shop?
I actually, you know, I've been in that situation just in the past couple years, because I've sort of quote unquote plateaued at my shop. Yeah. You know, I'm not going to make any more money, you know, so to speak, per hour. I'm not going to become the service manager. I'm not going to own the business. So, you know, what I did at first, it was a little discouraging, but I'm like, you know what? I just need to do something on my own. And so I started my own diagnostic business on the side, you know, that my employer is perfectly fine with. And, you know, and I do it when I'm not at the shop. I'm helping other people out or helping other shops out once in a while. Mostly individuals that either they cannot afford to take their, you know, vehicle into a regular shop, or shops can't figure it out and it's been sitting in their yard. And so basically, you know, a lot of technicians just have to learn how to market themselves, because if you are a good technician, you don't have to leave the shop you're at, but just come up with another, you know, type of revenue source.
So let me ask you this then, Damon, is there any way, or do you see opportunities down the road where an independent shop could help cater that, like help you to grow into that relationship where you're dealing with other shops, or is it something where it's just like, you know what, I want my independence, I want to do this thing on my own and try it? Or is there opportunity? And that's with me talking to I talk both dealerships and independents a lot. I know the independents, when they're talking about how they kind of add up against a dealership, that's one of their concerns is, okay, how do I paint a path for these good techs so that they'll want to stay here for a long time? And I don't know that I've got a great answer for it yet. And I'm interested to hear from your standpoint if there's opportunities for an independent shop to maybe have avenues where you don't even have to open up your side business, or even if it's just like, okay, you love your side business, let's try to work with you. Are there opportunities there to maybe just change the way that we look at that?
I think really it boils down to, well, a lot of shop owners, that I've seen are not open to such. They're not, as a matter of fact, I have interviewed some places before where you would have to sign a no compete clause. You're not going to do side work, while you're employed here. So a lot of shop owners are scared of losing business. They're scared of losing customers, or yourself as a technician. They're not open to it. But I think really if I were a shop owner, to create a broader path for a technician or more advancement, I would come up with more services that the shop could offer, theirself. Like, for example, and I really sort of fell into this, but we're the only shop in our county, other than a dealership, that does carbon cleaning on gasoline direct injected engines. We're the only ones, and we have a local company that we order the supplies from. I was trained in it, and we're the only ones that can offer that. And I sort of fell into it in a training session, learning about, well, what is GDI? I'd never heard of GDI before, and fell into it. And I pitched it to my boss, and and at first, and they're the old school, they grew up in this. And at first they were skeptical. They're like, no, there's no way that, your chemicals are going to get that carbon off those valves, and it's not causing a problem. So it really didn't happen until we had a couple customers come in with a GDI engine. They were having the cold misfires, like, are typical with them. And I said, let me do this. Let me try this. And so I did it, and took pictures with the borescope before and after, and, and educated both the customer and the shop management that, hey, this is another revenue source. So now guess where all the GDI cleanings come in our county? They come to us.
That is awesome.
It's just stuff like that. It's just what can your shop offer that no other shops are doing, and I'll put this technician in charge of that, and maybe give them a little bonus or whatever.
Yeah.
So yes, shops can do things like that and just be innovative. And even in the past, our shop has held just Saturday training, hot dog cookout, and sort of training education session for customers. This is how you check your oil. This is how you check your fluids, and just getting involved in the community. And when you have customers start coming in and saying, hey, I want so-and-so to work on my vehicle, because I trust them, they know what they're doing, and they know my vehicle, then that employee becomes a more valuable asset to the company and to their self. A lot of people take pride in that. And that's another way that shops, the owners, can retain these technicians.
I think we should have your management on a podcast with you at some point, because I'd love to talk to them, just because I think they do some really, to me, the fact that they've been around for a while and then they also listen to you with something like that, to even have the patience to say, yeah, let's give this a shot. That doesn't happen everywhere. I love that piece.
No.
And then secondly, I think as we're looking at this, and if you were a tech and again, you're happy in your job, but when you're looking at a potential employer, I think it's pretty common knowledge that, especially good diagnostic techs could basically go anywhere they wanted right now. Any shop would be crazy to turn down a good diagnostic tech.
Yes.
And so to me, the tables have turned a little bit, right? Where it's not so much the shop interviewing the tech as much as it is the tech interviewing the shop, right?
Absolutely.
And so when I look at it from that standpoint, what's appealing to a good, like you, for a good diagnostic tech? what is it something like when you were, if you look at another shop and you saw, Sixth Street Automotive out there and you didn't know anything about them, but you wanted to know if they were a good employer, like what would you look at?
Well, I would, if I didn't know anything about the company, I would first look at reviews, look at their web presence, look at their, website, if they had one or whatever. And basically the reviews are tell a lot about the shop, but really not the inner workings of the shop. And basically, if I were to go interview somewhere now, I want to go meet your technicians. Hey, walk me through the shop. I want to kind of get a feel of it, because what would make me, turn me away from a shop, a lot of places I've seen is they have a lot of conflicts between technicians or whatever. I interviewed at one shop years ago and they say, now this person here, he doesn't get along with person B, and that person doesn't get along with A and C, and I'm like, well, you've got a lot of problems in your shop.
Yes.
I was thinking, and I ran away. So, you don't want to go to a place like that, but, if a technician's looking for a new shop, look at reviews, go there, walk through the shop. You can get a good feel and maybe just talk to a technician, maybe on their lunch break or whatever. Hey, how do you like it here? And they may or may not be honest with you at the time, but, you'll get a good feel.
Right? Like when you walk into a shop, you can tell if the guys get along or not, or the guys and girls. Like, I don't know. There's something about walking in somewhere and you can feel the tension when it's not, not cohesive, that I think sticks out like a sore thumb. And if you're not back in the shop, and this is probably more prevalent to dealerships where if maybe a dealer principal is not in the back as much, they don't understand it. But the dynamics that go into a stressful shop, you can feel it. Like there's just a different feeling about it.
Yes, there is. And actually, some people have been hired in our company and they were just that piece of sandpaper, and pretty soon they had to go. Either they quit or got fired or whatever. But it only takes one person, to spoil the attitude of the whole shop and the morale of the whole shop. But I think, a lot of independent shops, such as the one I work at, they can't offer health insurance. They can't offer 401k. Some of them can, but, ours can't. But I'm not going to go jump to a shop, that offers these things just because they offer those couple benefits. If I'm not happy at my job, if I can't go there and quote unquote relax at work and be at peace at work, then I don't want to be there. And right now I'm that way where I work. I enjoy it. I look forward to getting up and going to work. I get there early, and it hasn't always been that way, but it's that way now. And if you and a key thing too is for the technicians to voice to their employers, hey, can you change this, or this is going on? And a lot of them are just afraid to speak up.
Well, and I think it comes down to when a tech doesn't have a good relationship with a manager. And a lot of times to me, I put the blame on the manager for not kind of driving that relationship. And I've been on the management side where maybe a tech is just, they're not going to let you in, right? Like they don't like you for whatever reason. And I always made it my goal to try and break down those barriers, just because I think that's my personality. And I just genuinely am interested in people. But there's some people that just, you have to earn their trust, right? Like it's just like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like you have to earn their trust. And when that relationship breaks down and there's no communication other than like on a need to have communication basis, to me, I don't think that's a good way of doing business. And that's like you said, the sandpaper that starts creating that friction between the two. And how important is transparency in that? And so like when I talk about transparency, not just saying, hey, Damon, go do your job, get out of this office. Like, but really, hey, here's the latest, what's going on in the office. Like, what do you want to hear from your end?
Well, I want to hear, I guess, more than what my job entails. In other words, I like knowing the whole dynamic. What really opened my eyes as a technician a lot of times is when I started actually talking to the customers, or requesting to talk to a customer. I would get a worksheet, a work order on a vehicle. They would complain of some type of intermittent complaint. And, and eventually I said, look, let me just talk to the customer. And I gained so much from that, whereas typically only the service advisors are going to speak to the customer. But, I like to know more than just my job entails. It just gives me a better sense of, what the company is doing, how it's running, and also it goes back, I guess, into that cross-training type thing. Whereas I should know enough about this company if I've been there, 5+ years, to where I could fill in this role if I need to. I could answer the telephone. I could, let it take a customer's money or whatever. And that's important to me too. But again, you have some employers that no, you're not going to step behind this counter. You're not going to answer our telephone. And I guess it depends on the individual.
I think it goes right back to what we talked about before, where too many owners or managers kind of put all the technicians in one bucket.
Yeah.
And where, for me, yes, Damon, I can put you in front of a customer. You're well presented. You're well spoken. You're not going to have a problem talking to a customer. But if Timmy or whoever over in the corner is not good with customers, but really good, undercar guy, just does all, like, everything you ask him, I think you can't just put policies in place for cross training, or, because there's just going to be some people that just flat out can't do it, right? Or don't want to do it, like it want nothing to do with the customer. And I think that's where looking at techs as individuals rather than one collective is such a big deal. Such a big deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I've worked with some technicians that there's no way I'd let them answer my phone. You're not gonna speak to a customer, but they're a great technician. It's just it's a matter of the employer finding out the technician's strong suits and weak suits. And I believe, it goes all the way back to the initial interview when that technician sits down, and it's how they're interviewed. And because one of the hardest questions when I first started, my working career was when an employer asked me, they'll always ask, what are some of your strengths? And we're great at telling our strengths about ourselves. And then they pop that question, well, what are some of your weaknesses? Well, I don't have any.
I care too much.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a matter of the employer getting to know the individual technician and know what they are capable of and not. And, in a lot of things, it's just up to the technician to just take the initiative and say, hey, can I do this, or can I try this? Like I've done at my shop, and basically I've proven what I can do and, what I'm not so good at.
I think we should have an entire podcast based on what you would tell yourself when you were on the tire side, right? And like when you're on the tire and lube side, on how that transition works to go from that side over. Because one, I could have done that the entire time this podcast, because I'm fascinated by what your thinking was as you went from, kind of just, one, reverse your career and your life upside down to go do this. And then to take the initiative to become excellent at what you're doing. I think there's a lot of young techs that would benefit from hearing your story in that regard, and I know this was really kind of about the looking at shops and what maybe shops can change, but I think there's a lot of great insight that you offer for, a younger tech too, that I think would be hugely helpful.
No, I'd be happy to talk about that sometime, because there, a lot does go through your mind as a new technician. And especially me coming in so late in the game, like I'm 49 years old, and I wouldn't have ever dreamt that I'd have been in this role, when I was 18. But I love it, and it's something that I can, work up into a retirement in, and and again, it's just depends on the individual. But it was a big step, and and a lot of fear there going into the full technician role, especially a flat rate place. But fortunately it worked out.
Yeah. Well, and I just think I talk about this a lot, but when we're trying to get the voice of technician out, and it's such a pleasure when we get to have somebody like you on, Damon, that's passionate about the industry, is smart, well-spoken, and might not have the typical career path of what, others do. but to shine a light and show the individuality of how different techs are. And you could have a good diagnostic tech that has a completely different background than what you've got, or you could have somebody that's got, like it just, to me, it's really embracing the uniqueness. It's embracing that that technicians are extremely smart people. I don't know that techs get enough credit for how incredibly smart all of you are, especially the true technicians, the ones that can dive into a schematic or dive into a scope, or it's some of the stuff you're reading is, I mean, that's some really, really hard stuff to
It is. It is. And and a lot of it I couldn't soak up the first time, or I'd read about it in a magazine and it would just be like foreign, but then I would have to get it another way, watch a YouTube video, or talk to another technician that's doing it. And, and technicians, an important thing, one last thing really to mention is that technicians learn in different ways, and it's up to the employer really and the technician to work together and find out how does this technician learn best. Some are visual, some are read a book, some are show me how to do it and I can do it, right after you do it. And it's just different, just like school, not all students are the same. And so it comes down to that.
Well, and I think that's where, diving into whether it's personality assessments or, and it's funny because when I was growing up, I always remember saying, well, I learned best by doing. And I think I was saying it just because that's what my dad said. Like I had no idea how the best way for me to learn was. And it ultimately ended up, it probably was the best way for me to learn, is to screw it up and then keep going at it and keep going at it. But I didn't truly grasp what that meant. That meant screwing something up and then understanding why you screwed it up. And then, looking back, there's so many things I could tell my younger self. I feel like that would have been so much more impactful as I came into the industry. So I love your approach. I really, really have enjoyed our conversation here. I will really hope we can get you back on again, because I think this is just, it feels like we barely touched the surface on some of this stuff that I know we could really, really dive into. Absolutely.
I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on the podcast. It was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. It's my very first podcast. So
it won't be your last. It won't be your last. You'll have plenty. But we appreciate you, Damon, and everything that you're doing out there, and look forward to the next one.
Okay, Jay. Thank you.